this moves back like 4 rows. So do we mind condensing back just a little bit, being a little closer with each other? I hate to make you guys move, I'm sorry. But if we could, like 1 or 2 rows back, just yeah, that's fine. No, it's fine being close. I feel like I need like half the auditorium back since
I have been serving to you.
All right. Thank you guys. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be mean. Okay. We have been given a challenge today. When earlier in the week, Steve messaged me and said, hey, you want to teach? I said, yeah. What am I teaching? He's like, I think it's in Proverbs. I said, great. What chapter? He's like, all of it. I said, oh no. All of Proverbs? So we have all of Proverbs today. And then I looked at the lesson, and the lesson says, Proverbs, and the subsection is wisdom. So we're covering not only all of Proverbs, but all of wisdom today. So we have got a lot to do. So today might be a little different than, I usually try to make it very discussion-based or as much as I can. But since we're covering so much today, I want to try and hit the highlights of Proverbs. And so it might be a little bit more like a lecture than a discussion. So I'm sorry. But we're going to try and make it through as much or all of it if we can. And if you have questions, that doesn't mean don't ask them. Feel free to raise your hand. I just might be a little slow as I'm kind of talking through this, okay? So, last week, what did you guys study? Do we remember? Ecclesiastes. That's fun. I love Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is one of my favorite books. But Ecclesiastes, along with Proverbs and one other book, make up the wisdom section of the Old Testament. Does anybody remember what the last book is? Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job, actually. Not Song of Solomon. So it's Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. That's the wisdom literature of the Old Testament. And those 3 books are very codependent. They're very interesting because they are 3 different perspectives on what it means to live a good life. So the goal of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job are to show us this is what a good man looks like, or a good person looks like in the eyes of God. This is how to live according to what God wants for you. Okay? And they each give, like I said earlier, 3 different perspectives. Ecclesiastes and Job address the exceptions to the rule. So, quick summary of Job, right? Job is a great man, right? He does really good things. He's one of God's favorite, in essence. And bad stuff still happens to him. And so Job is about that. It's about addressing why do bad things happen to good people. That's what Job kind of addresses. Ecclesiastes also kind of seeks to answer that question a little bit. But Proverbs is mostly about the general rule. So what it's saying is, if you do these things, you will generally have a good life, and good things will happen to you. So there's a long section, or there's lots of proverbs in here that are aiming to show you how to live a good life. Okay, let me think here. Trying to figure out where to start. So. The first thing we need to ask, I think, is, what is a proverb? Does anybody know what a proverb is? Do like a one-sentence summary?
Wise saying?
Yes, a wise saying. Usually short. It's just there to convey wisdom. It exists simply to be a generally helpful statement. Right? So, like, one of the statements in here often is, listen to your parents. That is a wise and helpful statement. It's very short, but that's what it's there for. So there are over 800 proverbs in the book of Proverbs. So there's lots of really short statements. What I have found through experimentation when studying with other people is my Bible does something that I don't know how many of yours does. You're not going to be able to see it from the back, so I'm not even going to try and show you, but mine actually splits them up. So if you look, probably want to flip to somewhere after Proverbs 10. You should see, if you have the same thing that my Bible does, like a bunch of little statements, and they're split up by spacing. Okay? If you don't, they're all kind of smashed together. They're all like one after another, kind of just like anywhere else in the Bible, you know, like just long sentence paragraphs and things like that. That makes Proverbs a little confusing because they're all kind of jumbled together. So when you're reading Proverbs, you have to keep in mind that it is short statements. They're meant to be short, independent statements. They're not necessarily grouped by idea. So you might have one proverb and then go to the very next one and it'd be about something totally different. And that's, if you're confused, that's okay, because it's meant to be, they're just a collection of sayings. So these proverbs, who wrote Proverbs? Who wrote that one? Who wrote Proverbs? Solomon. Did Solomon write all of the Proverbs? What?
Probably not.
No, he didn't. Okay, so if you flip back to chapter 30, so Proverbs chapter 30. Somebody wants to read verse 1.
The words of King Lemuel, an oracle that his mother taught him.
That's 31, but yes, so that was the next place. So 31, the words of King Lemuel, right? Chapter 30, verse 1. That's okay.
The words of Hagar, son of Jacob, the oracle.
Yep, so we have those two that are named. So we have two other authors of Proverbs that are named. We have King Lemuel and Agur, sorry, I couldn't remember how to say that. So we have Agur and King Lemuel. Those are other two authors. There's also two sections in the book that are anonymous. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But overall, the majority of these are written by King Solomon. They're compiled after his death. And these are not all of the Proverbs that King Solomon said. These are actually a very small sampling of them. I cannot remember where it is in my mind. There's another place that talks about how many Proverbs and how many Psalms King Solomon wrote, and there's a lot of them. And these are a small sampling of them. But these are the ones that have been passed down, have been preserved. And the goal of Proverbs, the book, is to get at this thing we've been talking about, wisdom. The Hebrew word is, and I butchered it, but it's chokhmah. Okay, the word is chokhmah, and it means, it's usually translated wisdom, but it's a little more nuanced than that. I think this is one of the coolest words in the Old Testament. I really like it. So it does apply to wise judgments. So when Solomon was judging the two prostitutes, right, and the child, if you guys remember that story, Solomon says, cut the baby in half. Okay, all right. That was a wise judgment. We could say that Solomon judged with chokhmah. Okay? But also, on the other hand, the word encapsulates general skill. Okay? So you can build a cabinet with chokhmah. All right? So it's not just an intellectual wisdom as we're kind of thinking of it. The way that Proverbs and the rest of the wisdom books use this word. Well, let me back up for just a second. When God created the world, God created the world with chokhmah. And so the way that Proverbs and the other wisdom literature use this word is like the wisdom of God. It's like the creation power of God. So what you're trying to live your life according to is kind of like the order of the universe. So So what it says is like God, when he created the world, he created it with this skill, with this wisdom. And if you try and behave like that, then you're going to fall in line and it's going to work for you. Because that's how God created the universe to be. And so Proverbs is trying to, it has a bunch of these short sayings that are giving us different glimpses of what this creation power is, what Chokhmah means. Okay? So that's what Proverbs is trying to get at. Mainly, like I said, I'm trying to breeze through so we get as much of this as we can, but main themes of Proverbs. Okay? So the main theme of Proverbs, like I said before, wisdom, but it also contrasts wisdom with folly. So there's a lot of, wisdom looks like this, and foolishness looks like this. Do this and don't do that, right? But also it talks a lot about this thing called the retribution principle, which is a fancy way of saying you get what you deserve. Okay? So the retribution principle is very prominent in Proverbs. It is not very prevalent in Ecclesiastes and Job. So Ecclesiastes and Job, kind of the idea is you don't really get what you deserve, right? Bad things happen to good people, like we said earlier. And like I said before, Proverbs is very big on you get exactly what you deserve if you do the right things, right? Well, and if you don't, you get what you deserve there in that sense too. Anybody have any questions so far? I know that was kind of a lot. Pretty good. Okay. So now I just kind of want to talk about organization. So the first section, chapters 1 through 9 of Proverbs, is all introduction. So there aren't actually any Proverbs, technically, in the first 9 chapters of Proverbs. The Proverbs start in chapter 10. Those are the sayings of Solomon. Okay? So chapters 1 through 9 are kind of an introduction. And verses 1 through 7 is kind of the mission statement of Proverbs. So we'll go ahead and read that. Proverbs chapter 1, verse 1. The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. To know wisdom, and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase learning. A man of understanding will attain wise counsel. To understand a proverb and an enigma, the words of the wise and their riddles. And that's the first section, that's the introduction. And then we have the very next verse, which is kind of how to do that. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. So the first 6 verses are saying, here's what we're trying to do. Verse 7 says, here's how we're going to do it. And then the rest of chapter 1 through chapter 9 are about describing what wisdom is. And Proverbs, in particular, I think this is done other places, if I remember correctly, but Proverbs is very specific about it. Proverbs describes 2 women. It says the wise woman and the foolish woman. And then it refers to them as wisdom and folly throughout the rest of the book. And we have the rest of chapter 1 through chapter 9 are a set of speeches from a father to his son, saying, this is what a good man looks like, this is what wisdom is, this is what folly is. And then we have a couple speeches by wisdom. Wisdom speaks to us, personified, in chapter 8 and chapter 9. So if you flip to chapter 8, starting in verse 12, so the first 11 verses are really the setup. It says, so does not wisdom cry out and understanding lift up her voice? She takes her stand on the top of a high hill, beside the way where the paths meet. She cries out by the gates at the entry of the city, at the entrance of the doors. To you, O men, I call, and my voice is to the sons of men. O you simple ones, understand prudence. And you fools, be of an understanding heart. Listen, for I will speak of excellent things, and from the opening of my lips will come right things. For my mouth will speak truth. Wickedness is an abomination to my lips. All the words of my mouth are with righteousness. Nothing crooked or perverse is in them. They are all plain to him who understands, and right to those who find knowledge. Receive my instruction, and not silver, and knowledge rather than choice gold. For wisdom is better than rubies, and all the things one may desire cannot be compared with her. I, wisdom, dwell with prudence, and find out knowledge and discretion. The fear of the Lord is to hate evil. Pride and arrogance are the evil way, And a perverse mouth I hate. Counsel is mine and sound wisdom. I am understanding, I have strength. By me kings reign, and rulers decree justice. By me princes rule, and nobles, all the judges of the earth. I love those who love me, and those who seek me diligently will find me. Riches and honor are with me, enduring riches and righteousness. My fruit is better than gold, yes, than fine gold, and my revenue than choice silver. I traverse the way of righteousness in the midst of the path of justice, that I may cause those who love me to inherit wealth, that I may fill their treasuries. And this, I think this is one of the coolest sections. So hear what wisdom is saying. Remember, we just talked about Chokmah, what that means, right? So you got this idea of Chokmah in your mind. The Lord possessed me, wisdom, at the beginning of his way. Before his works of old, I have been established from everlasting. From the beginning, before there was ever an earth, when there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no fountains, abounding with water. Before the mountains were settled, before the hills, I was brought forth. While as yet he had not made the earth or the fields, or the primal dust of the world, when he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he established the clouds above, when he strengthened the fountains of the deep, when he assigned the sea its limit, so that the waters would not transgress his command. When he marked out the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him as a master craftsman, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and my delight was with the sons of men. So, we learn a lot about wisdom from her speeches, right, from these sections. And so one thing that I think Proverbs is trying to get us to acknowledge, first and foremost, is that wisdom is available for everyone. And not only is it available, it is asking for it. It's like, yes, come here, know what I am, right? So it's not only that wisdom is like something that you have to work hard to get. Proverbs claims that if you work to wisdom, if you're trying to find wisdom, wisdom's going to find you. It's just going to happen, right? And that's kind of the promise of Proverbs, is that, you know, we'll meet you halfway. Work for it, and it'll find you. Ask and you shall receive, right? Wisdom hates evil. That's the other thing that we're trying to learn here, right? Wisdom is better than riches, although Proverbs in particular, and this is interesting, Proverbs often equates riches with wisdom. If you are wise, you will be rich, is one of the messages that Proverbs seems to send. Now, that's not always true in Proverbs. Okay? In Proverbs, it does countermand that sometimes, but a general sense is, okay, if you are wise, then you will find that you will become rich, because good things happen to good people. Retribution principle, right? That's the general rule. If you're good, or if you are wise, good things will happen to you, is what Proverbs is trying to claim. And then one other thing that I think is really important, I love highlighting verse 30 and 31, right? Wisdom is eternal. Wisdom has been there from the beginning with God. God created wisdom. God, when He creates, created wisdom. Because wisdom is how He creates everything, right? He creates everything in a wise way. And wisdom's delight was in us, right? So that we are a wise thing that God created. When God created, He created us with wisdom. And so when we're trying to seek wisdom, that's what we're trying to find. It's the same, like, creative power that God used to make us. I just think that's super cool.
What is happening a little bit here is the old saying before Solomon's passing, it's not what you take with you, it's what you leave behind.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where these words come from.
Yeah, it's not what you take with you, it's what you leave behind. Okay, so that's a taste of the speeches of wisdom. And the speeches of wisdom are, like I said, in this longer section, chapters 1 through 9, where they're speeches from a father to his son. And I just want to read a little bit of that to kind of give you guys an idea of what's going on in chapters 1 through 9. So if you flip back to chapter 1, I want to highlight verses 8 and 9 real fast and talk about poetry, because we all love poetry. All right. Chapter 1, verse 8. Everybody, we're good, right? I'm not moving too fast or too slow or anything. Okay. My son, hear the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother, for they will be a graceful ornament on your head and chains about your neck. So that's the beginning of the section where it's just talking about these speeches from a father to his son. But it's not just about that. I just wanted to be clear. It's not just about men. This is addressed specifically to you. So this is a general sense of wisdom. And I'll show you how we can kind of identify that even in this section where it's a father talking to his son. Have you guys talked at all about poetry, how to identify poetry in the Old Testament? Okay. If you read through Proverbs, Psalms, Ecclesiastes, Job, most of Job, and there's a bunch of other places in the Old Testament where poetry appears. We didn't really know how to identify poetry in Hebrew for a long time. It was kind of ambiguous. We weren't really sure. They came up with a bunch of markers that they decided this is how you figure out what poetry is. Poetry has a very distinct structure in Hebrew. And because a lot of other languages, like to us, one marker of poetry is like rhyming. If you rhyme a lot of your sayings, you're kind of talking proverbially, you're speaking in poem, right? The markers for poetry in Hebrew are what they call parallelism. Okay, that's probably the biggest, most easiest marker to see. Parallelism happens in like 3 different ways. You have synonymous parallelism, the same, right? Antithetic parallelism, opposite. And you have progressive parallelism, which is going to continue a similar idea. We can see that here in verse 8, right? My son, hear the instruction of your father. So that's the first part. And do not forsake the law of your mother. But it's saying the same thing, right? It's poetic, but that's synonymous parallelism right there, right? You can see how it's the same idea repeated twice. That's a marker of poetry. And then it describes why. It says, for they will be a graceful ornament on your head and chains about your neck. Another synonymous parallelism, right? If you read throughout Proverbs, you're going to find a lot of that. They're saying the same thing over and over again. And if you're going, didn't I just read that? Why am I crazy? You're not. It's poetry. Okay? So I just wanted to mark that out first. But what this is telling us, it often uses this to describe kind of a general sense more than it uses something to be incredibly specific. And what I mean by that is, when it's saying, like, obey your father and obey your mother in this parallel structure, what it's saying is listen to your parents because they have wisdom, right? It's not saying specifically men listen to your fathers or daughters listen to your mothers. It's saying listen to your parents, right? So it uses these two specific sayings that are synonymous to describe a general truth that believes or that agrees with both of those sayings. Does that make sense? I'll go with that. I just wanted to make sure that we were clear on that. So, to continue on, the speeches of the Father to the Son. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, this is verse 11, sorry. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait to shed blood. Let us lurk secretly for the innocent without cause. Let us swallow them alive like Sheol, and whole like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all kinds of precious possessions. We shall fill our houses with spoil. Cast in your lot among us. Let us all have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep your foot from their path. For their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. Surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird. But they lie in wait for their own blood. They lurk secretly for their own lives. So are the ways of everyone who is greedy for gain. It takes away the life of its owners. So I like using that one to sum up chapters 1 through 9, because basically that's it. We're describing what wisdom is and why you should want it. Okay? And we are comparing that, well, contrasting that to folly, why you don't want folly. And I want to draw attention real fast to verse 17 and 18, because I think these are such cool sections. So, well, we'll start at 16. For their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. Surely, in vain, the net is spread in the sight of any bird. That took me a long time. I read that a couple times and went, what? What this is saying is describing something really, really interesting. So if you're trying to catch a bird, you don't go up to the bird and say, oh, I'm trying to catch you, right? Like the birds, surely if you spread the net in the sight of the bird, it's in vain, right? Because you're not going to catch a bird that way. But they, speaking of the people who are foolish, lie in wait for their own blood. They lurk secretly for their own lives. So what it's saying is, like, you want to catch a bird, you don't go up to it and throw up the net. But fools, they walk up and they throw up their own net. That's what's happening. They're dumber than any of the animals, because they're walking up, and if you're trying to catch a bird or you're trying to catch anything else, you don't set the trap while it's watching you. But fools set their own trap. And that's why you should not want folly. Because if you are a foolish person, you're setting yourself up for failure. And you're like, oh yeah, this is going to be good. And you don't even see that you're walking into your own grave. And that's what the Father is trying to impart to the Son there. I think it's really funny. Proverbs is filled with a lot of almost funny statements. Because it's meant to be memorable. It's meant to be something that you can memorize and that you can refer back to as a reference. So Proverbs was not something that was meant to be read once and then done. It's not something that you go, I'm going to go tell the story of Proverbs, which is funny. I was concerned about teaching all of it in one thing, because you can't just sum up Proverbs real effectively. It's meant to be read and reread and referenced over and over and over and over and over again, because these are the words of wisdom. And you can't just read it once and get it. Okay? All right, so that is chapters 1 through 9, the basic outline, and a sample of where we're at. Anybody have any questions about those? We covered them about as broadly as we could, I think. So it's hard to have questions, I understand. In chapter 10, we start with the Proverbs of Solomon. In fact, most of your translations probably have chapter 10, verse 1. What does it say? The Proverbs of Solomon, right? It starts out, it says, these are the Proverbs of Solomon. So what follows is a ton of like one-liners. And because of Hebrew poetry, it's like two-liners, right? But that's the idea, is that it's saying the same thing, or it says antithetical things in order to get you to think about the message. There are tons of these. It goes through chapter 22. So there are hundreds of these proverbs. You can go through all of them. They're all different. They talk about different things. They have consistent themes, oftentimes. Some of those consistent themes revolve around so be merciful is the first thing. Be merciful. Don't love money, but it will come to you, is kind of the message. Right? Don't love money, God will take care of you, is in essence what Proverbs is saying. Judge righteously is another one that Proverbs is addressing throughout these 12 chapters. Be generous, I think, is probably a good way to sum up the next thing. But there's a bunch other than that. But those are some general themes that Proverbs tries to address in the next 12 chapters. Then we get to chapter 22. And this is something that I don't know how much I agree with, but I found it in multiple scholarly sources, so I'm going to go with it. But I didn't know this before, so it's interesting. So if you turn to verse 17 of chapter 22, it says, "Incline your ear and hear the words of the wise. Apply your heart to my knowledge." And it's like, what have I been doing for the past 20 chapters? Right? That's what we have to do. Well, what this is marking a new section. When it says, "Incline your ear, hear the words of the wise," it's implying that this is no longer Solomon speaking. This is a collection of anonymous sayings. So this is the other writers of Proverbs. And it happens again if you go to chapter 24, verse 22. That's not right. Hold on a second. Yes, no, it is. I'm sorry. Chapter 4, verse 23. I got mixed up. It says, "These things also belong to the wise." That's demarking another collection. So what happened is Proverbs was not written by Solomon during the time of Solomon. He probably wrote the Proverbs, but he wasn't the one who wrote the book Proverbs, right? We have indications that it was probably compiled most likely in the reign of Hezekiah, if I'm not mistaken. Hezekiah, I think it is. I get all the names mixed up. I'm pretty sure it's Hezekiah later on. So what we have is Hezekiah and his scribes are compiling all these statements of Solomon that are handed down, and they throw in some anonymous sayings also. That usually the sayings from anonymous sources, they're all kind of viewed, they're lumped into the same thing. If they agree with the rest of Solomon's sayings, then they also are trying to get at wisdom. Does that make sense? Wisdom doesn't solely belong to Solomon, I think is what this is trying to tell us. Does that make sense? Solomon was wise, and he was the father of Hebrew wisdom. But that wasn't the end. There were more. And I think that's what Proverbs is trying to tell us by giving us these two collections of anonymous sayings. All right? After the end of this next section of anonymous sayings, which is very short, it only goes through verse 34. So 24, verse 23, through 24, verse 34 is our second collection of anonymous sayings. Very special. And then after that, 25 through 29 are more of Solomon's Proverbs. And you can see that in 25 verse 1. These also are Proverbs of Solomon. Yes, it was Hezekiah. Which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied. Okay? So this next section is the next section of Solomon's. Yeah. And again, we could go through some of them, but it's difficult because they address so many different topics that it's hard to really kind of talk about a few of them, or all of them. But then we get to chapter 30. So chapter 30, we talked about earlier, is written by this guy named Agur. there's a lot of riddles in this section. So not only are they short, one-line, like statements of wisdom, right? They're also riddles. This was very common in the ancient East, the ancient Near East. They try to get you to learn by thinking about things. This is super common with Jesus also, right? All the parables. The point of the parables isn't to tell you a definitive answer, yes or no. The point is, if you trust God and you've read all of this, then by thinking about the proverbs that Jesus says, you should get to the answer. But you should get to it on your own because we want to learn as we're doing it, right? So that's what Jesus is doing, is kind of giving these riddles so that we learn as we're thinking about it. And that's what this section of Proverbs, there's a lot of riddles, and we'll go through them. But Agur is some random fellow. We don't really know much about him. We're pretty sure that he's given to us as an example of the ideal reader of Proverbs. So this is called an appendice by most people. If you look at any outlines of Proverbs, you'll see this chapter 30 and chapter 31 referred to as the appendices. These are what are tacked on to the end of the Proverbs to kind of give us more context and some more interesting things. So we'll read some of them here in the beginning to show you that. So the words of Agur, the son of Jacob, his utterance. This man declared to Ithiel and Ukal, surely I am more stupid than any man, and do not have the understanding of a man. I neither learn wisdom nor have the knowledge of the Holy One. And then he has a bunch of questions. We're going to talk about it in a second. And then basically throughout this chapter, he finds out by trying to understand wisdom and by reading Proverbs, is in essence what we get. By reading the words of the wise, he gets more wise. So what he's saying, so what this is saying is the ideal reader of Proverbs comes to the book, says, I don't really know anything. Let me know something. Reads Proverbs, tries to understand it, and goes, okay, now I know something. That's the short, right? I want to talk about something really cool here. There's actually a prophecy in Proverbs, and this is the only one that I know of. But this is really interesting to me, so I wanted to share it with you guys. So the words of Agur, the son of Jacob, his utterance, this man declared to Ithiel and Ukal, surely I am more stupid than any man, and do not have the understanding of a man. I neither learn wisdom nor have any knowledge of the Holy One. And then the questions he asks are what I would consider to be prophecy. We'll see if you guys agree. Who has ascended into heaven, or descended? Who has gathered the wind in his fists? Who has bound the waters in a garment? Who has established all the ends of the earth? What is his name, and what is his son's name, if you know? So to us, I don't know how many of you kind of have some recognition firing in your brain going, hey, hold on a second, I might know the answer to this. This is utterly confusing to the Hebrews of the time, right? He starts out by declaring he doesn't know who God is. I have no knowledge of the Holy One. I have no wisdom, right? And the Jews at the time were going, well, you're stupid because we've been given the Torah, right? So how don't you know who God is? And then he asks all these questions, and they're going, well, of course God has descended into heaven, or has ascended into heaven. Well, God gathers the wind in his fist. God bound the waters in a garment. What is his name? Well, his name is Yahweh. And what is his son's name? Well, hold on. We have to be talking about somebody different. Because God doesn't have a son. But us, right, having the gift of hindsight, can turn to John chapter 3 to find something really interesting. Maybe it's interesting to me. John chapter 3, verse 11. So this is Jesus talking to Nicodemus. Jesus says, most assuredly I say to you, we speak what we know and testify what we have seen, and you do not receive our witness. If I have told you earthly things and you do not believe, how will you believe if I tell you heavenly things? And then this is the key phrase here. No one has ascended to heaven, but he who came down from heaven, that is, the Son of Man, who is in heaven. That's the answer to this riddle, right? This is the Son. This is the name of the Son, right? And if you turn to Mark chapter 4, right, verse 36, Yes. 36. This is Jesus with the disciples sleeping in the boat. Now when they left the multitude, they took him along in a boat as he was, and the other little boats were also with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that it was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on a pillow, and they awoke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Then he arose and rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. But he said to them, Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith? And then this is the key. And they feared exceedingly, and said to one another, Who can this be that even the wind and the sea obey him? Right? And going back to Proverbs 30, who has established the ends of the earth, who has gathered the wind in his fist, who has bound the waters in his arm. This whole section is meant as a prophecy. And I just think that's really cool. And then we didn't get to chapter 31, but that is the Spartan Notes version of Proverbs. I hope that you go read it on your own, because it's an incredible book. And hopefully this has helped you guys a little bit in your understanding, so that when you go back through and read it, you kind of have a broader picture of what's happening. But thank you all. I appreciate it. We're out of time where I would ask for any questions, but thank you guys.
Feel comfortable doing PowerPoint?
Well, I can do with it.
I know you can, but I would rather, because you're like bound for like 2 weeks in a row, and like next week for something, you're on a plane, and these people train with PowerPoint. You see what I'm saying? So